Welcome to Kathryn Raaker's World. Innovation, culture, adventure, fashion and health, artists, destinations, traditions. This is Kathryn Raaker's World.
Hi, this is Kathryn Raaker of Kathryn Raaker's World and our syndicated TV show, and Let's Just Talk, our syndicated radio show. I am so honored to have with us today Joshua Horwitz, JD, a longtime Virginia resident, nationally recognized expert in gun violence, and co-director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. We're going to discuss the data, the policies on the table, and why Virginia's new political landscape creates a critical opening to save lives. I want to welcome you to our show today. If you don't mind me calling you Joshua?
You can call me Josh. Joshua, either way is fine.
Okay, that's fine. What has changed in Virginia? And what makes the legislative session such a unique opportunity for gun violence prevention in Virginia? Tell us, would you mind?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. We are in a unique situation in Virginia on two fronts. One is that we have, just an unacceptable high level of gun violence in Virginia, so that we have in 2024, almost 1,200 Virginians died by gun violence, 10,000 Virginians in the last decade, one every 8 hours. So we have a real, we must deal with this situation. Fortunately, we have new majorities in the House of Delegates, in the state Senate, and in the governor's mansion who are very supportive of gun violence prevention. The last governor vetoed a lot of important bills. We think there's a new opportunity to not only pass bills, but get the new governor to sign them and really work to prevent gun violence. So I think it's the best opportunity we've had in 5 years to pass gun violence prevention laws. I think we should take advantage of that. The new governor, Abigail Spanberger, is a real champion of this issue. We have a whole bunch of new champions in the House of Delegates and the Senate. And there's laws that we need to pass. We need to, continue to build on our red flag law. We need to do safe storage laws. We need, most importantly, to pass a firearm purchase or licensing law. Those are the pieces that we really need to put together, and some other things as well, but really would safeguard Virginians from gun violence. And, we can do a better job, and we have an opportunity, and we should do it.
Can you tell us more about the firearm purchase licensing procedures? Because this is a really important part of it, would you say?
It is a very important part of it, and states that have enacted these types of laws have seen their gun violence go down dramatically, and I think Virginia can do the same thing. So a purchase license, a firearm purchase or license, is like a driver's license. You wouldn't put someone on the road without testing them, without knowing that they could drive, and that's really similar to what we want to do with the firearm purchase or licensing. Some people call it permit to purchase, but you require someone to get a license before they purchase a firearm, and that would be good for 5 years. So what are the pieces that we want to enact that we think from our research really reduce gun violence and make this thing effective? Number one is any license should include firearm safety training. Obviously, it's important to be able to work the firearm safely. It's all and to know, what the rules are for self-defense, but it's equally as important to know when not to fire. So many people think, oh yeah, I need to learn when to fire. Understanding when you're putting yourself in danger, someone else in danger, the liabilities around pulling out a gun, all that's important to understand before you go out in public with a firearm or even bring it into your home. Second, we need a better job verifying who the person is who's buying a gun, and that's done by fingerprinting. So a second piece of a license is fingerprinting, and then you have to produce that for law enforcement. And that third piece, an in-person application for law enforcement, when you have to go to law enforcement with your fingerprints, with your certificate that you've done the safety training, that really reduces the opportunity for nefarious activity. In other words, if I'm going to law enforcement and putting all this information down and my fingerprints, right, I'm much less likely to then later be involved in a straw purchase, an illegal purchase, giving that firearm to someone who shouldn't have it. So that in-person application becomes very important. And finally, we need a more robust and comprehensive background check system. And the way you do that is give law enforcement the time to search the data they already have. And that means by requiring a waiting period for firearm purchases. So that would give law enforcement the time to clearly check the record. Sometimes these checks, the background checks they do, take time to resolve. You might need to call local law enforcement in somewhere in the state or even in another state. Waiting periods allow you to do that. You put those pieces together and you have a robust, comprehensive firearm purchase or licensing system, which, by the way, most Virginians support.
Now, my one question is, do you have a photo with that as well? That's a hologram?
That's still to be determined, whether you need a photograph and how state police are going to implement the license, but it will be an actual license. You'll have to have a license. And we have lots of experiences issuing licenses across the Commonwealth, but that's going to be worked out over the next couple of weeks as the bill moves forward.
Right. Well, I think these are wonderful, actually, because there's so many things that are out there right now. And the sad part is that a lot of children are getting a hold of their father's guns and all this other stuff. So how do you prevent that?
I mean, great question and something we've thought a lot about. And obviously, as you know, in the Commonwealth, we've seen too many tragedies with young people getting access to their parents' firearms. So I think there's two ways to approach that. First of all, we need to make it clear that if someone's under 18 and they get a gun, it's the parents' responsibility. Okay, so if it's their gun, they need to make sure that if your child's under 18, they don't have access. And right now that's only true up till 14. So if you're 15, 16, or 17, the parents right now in Virginia are not required to keep that away from a child. I think we all know that we can do a better job with that. The second piece is to make it extremely clear what safe storage is, right? Safe storage is locking your firearm. It's not putting it up on a shelf. It's not hiding it under the pillow. It is locking your firearm when it's not in use or not on your person. So we want to make sure that we have a clear safe storage requirement to lock your guns and a child access prevention law that prevents parents from giving access to their guns when they're under 18. Those pieces working together, we've seen the data about this, we think will save lives. And too many tragedies in the Commonwealth, we can do a better job there.
When they lock them up, can they take the ammunition out so that if somebody breaks into the cabinet, it's not got anything in it?
Yeah, well, I mean, best practices are to keep your ammunition separate from your firearm. And many of the locking devices that we see, actually, you can't keep, it's hard to have the gun loaded while you're using the locking device. The other piece that we highly recommend is just to have a gun safe. And you can get safes that are actually relatively inexpensive. You can get a key or you can make them biometric and lock that gun, not in a cabinet, not in your glove box, but in a designated safe storage box, something that's designed for firearms. And there's lots of places now that are giving them away. So there's opportunities to get these. They're inexpensive. You need to purchase them, but that's the best way. Lock your firearm, keep it locked and unloaded is the safest way to store firearms and prevent both child access, but really importantly, there's too much gun theft across the country, but especially in the Commonwealth. And making sure that your gun isn't stolen is actually another benefit of safe storage requirements. And we're seeing guns stolen all the time in Virginia. We need to do a much better job in that regard.
Can you tell us how the firearm purchasing license worked? I think you've talked a little bit about that. And why is it considered a cornerstone of effective gun policy?
Yeah, so it's a cornerstone. Like I said, it works like a license. I described what types of things will go into that license, but I really want us to follow the data. I'm in a school of public health. I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to follow the data. And we've seen, many studies now that show that firearm purchaser licensing saves lives. And it not, it prevents homicide, but also prevents suicide. People may not know that in Virginia, more than, about 60% of gun death is by suicide. And firearm purchaser licensing prevents suicide or helps reduce suicide as well. But you also have less incidents of mass violence. And additionally, you even see less police violence. So the data, following the data is important. And I want to talk about there's a study that's really in the middle of this field, which is to look at the difference between Connecticut and Missouri. Connecticut enacted a firearm purchaser licensing law in 1995, and you see the homicide rate decrease by about 30%, and somewhere similar for suicide. So you enact a law, you study it, and you see, wow, it really saves lives. But Missouri took the wrong path. They got rid of their firearm purchasing law, and in 2007, we saw the exact opposite results. We saw homicide rate jump 25%, suicide rate jump approximately 15%, and we saw more gun death. So how it works by making making people learn about safe storage, making sure people who shouldn't have access, don't have access, reducing impulsive gun purchasing. That's important for suicide. The waiting period is very effective. It can be effective at reducing suicide. So all these pieces work together to make firearm purchaser licensing an important cornerstone for everything. It makes all the other types of prohibitions, preventing someone who has a domestic violence misdemeanor from having a firearm, right? Who's a felony conviction. The purchaser licensing makes all the other laws work better. And we think it's the number one thing you can do from a policy perspective, a legal perspective, to stop gun violence.
We need to take a short commercial break and we'll be right back. Do you have a website that they can go to look to see all about this?
Sure, the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. If you Google it, you'll get our center, and there'll be lots of information about Virginia and gun violence across the country.
Okay, and we'll be right back on Kathryn Raaker's World, and let's just talk after these important messages. We are back on Kathryn Raaker's World, and let's just talk with a wonderful guest who is a longtime Virginia resident, nationally recognized expert in gun violence prevention, and co-director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence, and that is Joshua Horwitz, JD. And we're excited about what's happening in Virginia. I think it should be enacted. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it was enacted all over the country?
Well, it certainly would. And, I live in Virginia, and many of our team members live in Virginia. So we're passionate about working in Virginia. But our team is spread out across the country. And we are trying to make sure that these types of laws we're talking about here happen around the country. And we've made a lot of progress in states that, 5, 10 years ago, I never thought we'd make progress in states like Minnesota and Michigan and Nevada and in New Mexico. We're really making progress in. And so it's great to see that. It would be even greater if the Congress would continue to act. They passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act in 2022, which was a great start. But there's so much more to be done at the national level. And right now, but the states need to step in because the Congress isn't doing it. And so that's why when you have this historic opportunity to pass gun laws in Virginia, you need to take it, because there's no guarantee that Congress is ever. I think they will eventually, but right now they're not. And it's important that the states step into that breach and pass good laws.
And we talked about safe storage, especially, and that's strengthening Virginia's safe storage laws to protect children and teens. And I think, unfortunately, many years ago, my brother was shot and paralyzed because a teen broke open a chest where there was a gun and trying to frighten the children. And my brother was the one that suffered. And it's so sad because there was no, major person there to watch this child, and who was a teenager. And my brother and his friend went home for lunch without permission to this kid's house. And that's what happened. That's the reason why I think it's so important, because when it's in your family, I think you recognize it more than anything else, why it's so important to have this safety part of it, right, Joshua?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, sorry, I'm so sorry that your brothers had to go through that. And as you know, it affects the whole family and the community. And you hit on something that's very important. The gun was locked in a chest, you said, right? And who knows what type of lock that was and how it was protected. And in public health, we talk a lot about there's no such thing as like an accident. Things are predictable, that you can really take safeguards against. And in this situation, having a dedicated gun safe, something that is clearly locked, that you just can't, take a screwdriver and open, right? Those are the pieces that really protect people. And that's why we think in Virginia we should have that. It's not, we don't want you to leave a gun, just say, oh, it's locked in my glove box. No, we want a dedicated locking device on it. There are really interesting devices that safeguard firearms in cars. I'm not advocating for driving around with a firearm, but if you must, there's a really good way to lock the firearms when you're not in it, better than just putting it in the center console or in the glove box. So I think one of the reasons we're so adamant about having clear requirements on safe storage is so things like that won't happen. Oh, I thought I put it up on a high shelf, or I put it in a trunk with a 90-year-old lock, right? Or something like that. Like let's make it clear what is appropriate for a firearm, and that is a firearm safe. And remarkably, you can buy safes and locking devices very inexpensively. You can buy a cable lock for a firearm for easily under $10, easily. And a lot of places are giving them away now. So there's really no excuse for not locking your firearms. And I encourage everybody who's a firearm owner who's listening to this, please take that simple step. You'll save lives. You'll protect your family. You'll stop gun trafficking. And for the community at large, talk to your friends, make people aware of the options that are available for safe storage.
What improvements now can be made to Virginia's firearm removal laws?
So I think there's a couple of pieces that are important here. One is, let's talk about Virginia's red flag law, which we're very excited about. We helped develop 5 years ago, and it's working across the Commonwealth. And for people who don't know, a red flag law is a temporary protective order that allows a law enforcement to go to a judge to seek firearm removal to somebody who's a danger to themselves or others. So law enforcement gets a tip that someone is in trouble. They go investigate. This is not a criminal activity. It's a civil action. Gives law enforcement the tools to stop something bad before it happens. There's a lot of 21 other states in the country have red flag laws, as well as the District of Columbia and the Virgin Islands. So most of those other laws also, in addition to law enforcement, allow family members to petition. And we think that's important because there are times when family members may have way more information than law enforcement. They may want to move forward quickly. There may be even opportunities where law enforcement's not available. It could be a jurisdiction where there's not many law enforcement officers. So having family members, giving them the ability to petition a court for a red flag law and get that firearm removed will save lives. And we've seen this, other states have that. I hear a lot, oh, that can be abused. It's not being abused. The reason it's not being abused is because this is done with complete judicial oversight. It's not like someone says, oh, I want to get rid of my brother-in-law's gun. I'll just do it. That's not the way it works. You have to convince a judge under oath, under penalty of perjury, that someone is a risk. Once you do that, the judge can issue an order, and it's temporary and it's civil. In other words, it's not a criminal. You're not penalized. You just can't have access to a firearm.
Right, because
The
you
other
don't
part
know.
we need.
Go ahead. I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. I was just going to
No,
say,
I was gonna. Go ahead, please.
there are some people that are out there that have mental problems, or they're watching the internet so much that it entices them to do it sometimes. Am I right?
Well, we see no, we do look. We see a lot of violence being supported by internet activity. Numerous is the mass shooters are connected up over the internet. We also see people arguing over the internet that gets involved in gun violence, and there's there's just terrible incidents of people being like, I want to be like this mass shooter, and getting into a room where people are talking about it and encouraging that. It's just, look, the internet it can be used for many wonderful things, but it also has it can be used nefariously. So I think we have to be careful. But the point here is not to stop free speech. The point is that if someone is what we call leaking, showing signs of being a risk to themselves or other, right? Showing like that we have an opportunity to, as part of a threat management process, to get involved and stop something that happens before a tragedy occurs. Now, yes, it's definitely used for people who sometimes are mentally ill. Let's be clear, most people with mental illness are not going to be dangerous, but at certain times, at certain parts of an illness, it may be. And if that happens, the red flag law is a really good tool. A lot of times, though, we're not seeing people who are, chronically mentally ill or seriously mentally ill for years. We're seeing people who have episodic types of depression. They've lost their job, they're drinking too much, it's affected their relationship, and they really want to hurt themselves or somebody else. And it can, these things can be fleeting. They can, 3 months from now, 2 weeks from now, you can be totally fine. That red flag law just gives people the opportunity to take a deep breath. If they need treatment, whether that's alcohol treatment or mental health treatment or anger management treatment or whatever, it just gives them that opportunity to let's get a timeout. Let's get the most lethal means of violence out of their hands temporarily, and let's help them with services, et cetera. And when the crisis passes, you have access to your firearms again. So, I mean, right, you see definitely used for people with certain mental illnesses or certain times in their diagnosis, but it's broader than that. People with anger issues need this as well.
Right. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that have anger issues and need to go to anger management, and that would be part of it too, right?
It gives you time to do that. It gives time for other systems to kick in. It could be you need supportive housing. It could be you need relationship counseling. And it could be that you need a great mental health counselor, like all those, or maybe hospitalization. But until the firearm gets out of the situation, it's really hard to do all these other things, right? And so that's what we want to do. A pause, a time, just a time out to preserve life. And it's not a firearm like if you're convicted of a felony, you might not get your gun back for the rest of your life. A red flag law in Virginia is 6 months, right? And it gives an opportunity to heal, to get treatment, and then to get your firearms back. The other piece I wanted to jump into was domestic violence protective orders, right? And we have domestic violence protection orders in Virginia, and they are, they do require in many cases firearm removal, but we want to see that more robust. And how do we want to see that more robust? Number one, we want to make sure that you just can't transfer that gun when you're subject to a domestic violence protection order, that you just can't transfer that gun to your roommate, right? And be like, wink, wink, my roommate's got my gun, right? So we want to make sure that if you're not giving it to law enforcement, you have to give it to someone who is 21 years or older and doesn't live with you, all right? So in other words, it's not just like you can't keep them in the house and keep on doing what you're doing. The other thing is we want to close what's called the boyfriend loophole. So right now, sometimes, for domestic violence protection orders, it may be someone you've never lived with. It may be someone you've dated in the past who's stalking you. And we want to make sure if there's been a dating relationship that you can't have that the domestic violence protection order also includes gun removal. So there's ways that we can augment and continue to improve both the red flag law and the domestic violence protection order. These laws are effective, but we can make them even more robust. And the reason is when people are exhibiting that they're violent towards others, when they're violent towards themselves, let's take that seriously and use the tools we have to save lives.
One of the questions I want to ask you before we go to the end of the show, and that is, what if someone dies in the family, like your father or a stepfather, and you want to get the guns out of your house? Do you turn them into the police department? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, you call local law enforcement and you ask them what you can do. You can also you can sell them to a licensed dealer who will then have to sell them by a background check. What you don't want to do is start putting them in situations where there's no background check requirement or just giving them away without knowing who the person is you're giving them to. So if you give them to law enforcement or you give them to a licensed dealer that is required to do a background check and hopefully soon would actually only be able to sell to somebody with a permit, right? So a firearm purchase license. Those would be good ways to do it. But if someone dies, most importantly, secure the firearms, develop a plan to dispose of them safely if you want to.
Okay, and where can Virginians learn more about evidence-based solutions?
The Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. You can Google us, Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. We have some great information dedicated to Virginia. All the resources that I've mentioned, the research, they're there, lots of great infographics, but also just about gun violence around the country, solutions. It's all there on the website, and I think it's well done, and we invite you to come visit us at our website.
Okay, so that's Johns Hopkins Center for Solutions.com.
Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions, and if you want the actual the path, I can tell you it is at publichealth.jhu.edu/gun violence.
Slowly. Okay. Public health.
.jhu.edu/gun violence. But the easiest way is just to Google our center, the Center for Gun Violence Solutions.
Okay, I can't thank you enough for everything that you educated our audience on, and it's so important. I really would love to have you back in the future. I think this is such an important subject. I can't tell you personally, I do know, and it makes a difference.
It does. I've had a friend who died by gun violence, and it just affects people for years. And years, the ripples go on. And I've just numerous families I work with, I've experienced it personally. They don't go away, a month after the shooting. They last, these harms and pain last a lifetime. And that's why we need to do something about this.
That's right. And I want to thank you for everything that you do. And we'll get this out for you right away. Okay. And we'll send it
Thanks
to
for
you.
having me.
And thank you. And give your website one more time.
The Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. Just Google that. It's the easiest way to get to us.
Okay. And don't forget our website's at KathrynRaakersWorld.com. And that's our TV. And letsjusttalk.com. And thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful year.
Thank you.